Thank you, Mike. Thank you all. Thanks for being here. I'm going to plunge right in. I want to say a word about my title. The history of commerce, in my view, and I'm a son and grandson of shoe manufacturers. I grew up in New Hampshire, just up the road here, and so I speak from a sort of a longer-term perspective. The history of commerce, in my mind, always has somebody paying the price for someone else to gain. It might be laborers, it might be farmers, in my case, who are not getting paid a proper price. It might be consumers who are getting a product that maybe doesn't have the benefits that are being promised. It might be future generations whose planet is being stripped or denuded because of practices profit-taking today. I'm here to tell you, I'm going to try to prove this to you, so you don't have to just take my word for it, that that doesn't have to be the way it is. Those are the questions I started out with 28 years ago when I began in business. You know, my favorite philosopher is Lily Tomlin. You might have heard of her. She has this great line because when I think about, there's all kinds of discussion out there about sustainability and ethics and so on. She says, no matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up. And that's because there's an awful lot of lip service being given to these topics. There's a lot of what I call high talk-do ratio. I'm going to try to prove to you today that it doesn't have to be so, and particularly to the students who are here and watching on camera. I simply want to say the world you're inheriting is far different from the world that I inherited and that Mike has inherited. Clearly, I mean, the bad news is we've kind of screwed things up, to be perfectly blunt with you, when it comes to the environment. The good news is that there are incredible economic development opportunities in fixing those. Clearly, from my perspective, the screw-ups, the taking, the denuding, the depleting, and I'll share a few slides with you about that, are evidence of what I'm talking about, this tendency of commerce to take and not always give back. Again, I'll hope to persuade you otherwise. That's why I talk about this as a win-win-win prospect. I'm going to get you depressed for a couple of minutes. Bear with me. I'll get over that soon. But this is indeed what I'm talking about. For those of you, all of us, this is the world that we're heading for. I won't take you through every single bullet. You see this stuff in the news every day. You know what I'm speaking about. And indeed, the trends are serious. We know that there'll be 9.2 billion co-inhabitants in about 40 more years. Here we have more people still to come than are here now, to put it in sort of simple terms. And clearly, the ways that we've been using resources in the 20th century are not going to hold up. Our overdependence on fossil fuels and these other trends here are certainly known. Again, to all of you, you may or may not understand or have seen exposure to these bottom two. Trust me when I tell you that we're depleting species at very, very rapid rates. It's thought to be one about every 45 seconds. There are hundreds of thousands of species out there that we haven't even become acquainted with yet, and yet they're, because of toxification or depletion of natural resources, they're disappearing even before we've been out on our first date. Pollinator decline is a very, very serious issue. I'm not here to go into all of these other than to say these are the kinds of challenges that modern living has brought to bear on our future. And indeed, you could look at almost any aspect of how we relate to the planet and see signs of this failure, signs of this history of taking. Water is being talked about as the oil of the 21st century. I just came back from a farming group in the Southwest, and trust me, they are absolutely and utterly focused on water. It is the Colorado River, the mighty Colorado, doesn't even reach the Pacific anymore, and it may, at current rates of depletion of those waters, it may not even continue to meet the needs that it's providing for across the entire Southwest. And when water dries up, everything that we know to be the Southwest will be different. The reasons for this are obvious. They're well documented. We've been doubling water usage every 21 years. We've had a six-fold increase in the last 111 years in water use. And this is due to rising standards of living. We just assume now that water is always available at the tap, but also to levels of unsustainable levels of irrigated farmland. We're irrigating deserts out there. And when you fly over and you see those big circles, those are central pivot irrigation systems that are there trying to keep an area that is really not meant for wetland farming, keeping it fertile. The water, by the way, that strikes the ground in desert regions like the Southwest doesn't even reach 70% of the water doesn't even reach the crops. It's evaporated before it even touches them because we haven't put carbon matter in, we haven't acted in a systemic way to think about using that water. We've just turned on the tap and tried to get, even if it's 30% efficient, we felt like that was okay. But much of that water that we're taking out of the ground is disappearing. And of course, the corollary of that is that we've also been depleting topsoils. 50% of the topsoils that were here when Lewis and Clark made their way across the country are gone. They're not technically gone. They're in the bottoms of our oceans, but they've been blown off by wind or drained off by rainfall. And as you see here, areas larger than India and China have actually been depleted in the last 50 years. And as we've used up these topsoils, of course, it's made us much more dependent on fossil fuels, on chemical fertilizers, to replace that synthesized with synthesized fertility, the fertility that was there naturally. You know, the Mediterranean region was once the breadbasket of the world. Anybody who's traveled to the Mediterranean, I know I don't have to tell you, you don't see a whole lot of topsoils left anymore. But the Fertile Crescent, as it was known, was exactly that. It was many, many feet deep, many, many meters deep of rich, fertile topsoils. But in our sort of underdeveloped, immature way of relating to the world, we've never really thought about those resources as something that we need to protect. We've used them, we've taken nutrients up, we've grown food, we don't put down anti-erosive measures, and the net result is that we lose them. And in fact, a case could be made that we're certainly not the only culture in history who's used up our topsoils. A case can be made that many of the historic cultures, Egypt, Rome, Mesopotamia, have all risen and fallen on the strength of having vital topsoils. That is, when they lose their fertility, they lose their strength. They have to go out farther and farther for their food to bring it in. That makes them vulnerable to raiding tribes and so on and so forth.